try very hard to make sure we've read it for and I'm sure we'll be interested in hearing from you again in the future, because there's a lot of very important material you're working on that has an impact on based on our future recommendations. So thank you very much for coming. Thank you.
What we'd like to do is come back to this panel maybe in a year's time, again providing an update on the kind of start well theme, because obviously this is key for this group, so we could kind of present an update 1 year on from the start of the new strategy, if that makes sense. But we will share once the strategy is developed as well.
No, that would be lovely, and we can look at our work programme for the next cycle and get it into that. Yeah.
And just one please from me, we've got the Start Well survey obviously up and running, and if I could maybe circulate it somehow to all of you, we'd really welcome your thoughts on how the health wellbeing board can. Yes, great, perfect, thank you. So yeah, really appreciate your.
The second one wants us to do surveys. Thank you very much indeed for coming. Thank you. Moving on now to page 67. Thank you. If I could introduce David Beckford, if you understand, because we are running very late, we have read the report.
Just take any questions.
But if there's anything you particularly want to highlight, please do. Not silence.
I'll be very brief. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you. Good night.
So just really to highlight, universal credit has rolled out gradually over the last couple of years. It's live now in all of Merton. So it started off back in 2016 for single claimants, then in the Sutton postcode. As at the end of last summer, it's now across all postcodes in Merton. It's delivered by local job centres. So I've been reliant on them to provide some of the information that you were asking for around numbers. And it's not just dealing with one job centre. Mitcham, Kingston, Lambeth, Croydon, because we've got so many different postcodes in Merton, that's been a bit of a challenge. So I've provided the information that I've received. As I say, it's universal credit is implemented by the DWP and job centres, so I'm limited on sort of influence and what I can get from them. But the report, and I've reported to a couple of different panels, how we've seen it from Merton's residents' perspective. Some of the backlogs initially, that's certainly improved. The feedback that I've had from the job centre manager at Mitchell when they went live is certainly more positive than earlier on. Backlogs and time to make the first payment is reduced. Customers can get an emergency payment much quicker than they used to be able to. The first week that never used to be paid under the initial universal credit rules, if you like, has been abolished. So customers now get paid for that first week. So there have been tweaks to the system. Quite how, so really any Merton resident who's making a new claim now for a DWP benefit will be going on to universal credit, apart from a couple of exceptions that I put in the report. But we still will have a lot of Merton residents still getting housing benefit until the government decide that they're going to transfer them over to universal credit. And the latest time frame for that, I think, is 2021 to 23. Okay, so
Let's take any questions.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions?
Can I do?
Shall we start in a different way? All right, James. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So it was more a question for you, really, just a sort of observation that this panel only meets a few times a year, and there's nothing this evening on schools, or very little. And I just wondered what you were hoping would be achieved. I personally don't like universal credit, and I wish it wasn't here. But I just wondered what you were hoping to achieve as chair, putting this on the agenda tonight, just to give some guidance as to what might be achieved.
If I can answer that, as the CYP isn't just about schools, it's about children and young people. So And personally, I think it affects vulnerable families, and therefore that affects an awful lot of our children. I think it's linked to family fragility. It does, and family poverty. I think the report perhaps provokes more questions than provides more answers, and I think it does give us a glimpse. And I am a practicing Christian, so I can say I thank God that I don't need this. But there are people who do, and it worries me the process it's gone through, because we hear horrendous tales of people who've lost their home because they have no funding. If you've got no money and you're originally, okay, it seems to be improving, but not rapidly enough. You've got no money and you've got to wait. You can lose your home. You haven't got money to feed your children. Food banks are increasing. I think it's absolutely horrendous for families in particular, and even single people. And I think it has a huge impact, this whole funding process for families, and it impacts on every aspect of their life. We in this room, if we've never experienced poverty, are so lucky. We are so lucky. We may have had terrible dips in our lifestyle that have made us pull in everything, and maybe we've had family members who can help. If people are so vulnerable, and I went to look at Connect House, I walked the dog, and I would not like to live there. There's nowhere for children to play, no greenery. It is awful. And they will be on this system, and it has huge, they're all there with children, mainly women on their own with children, and this sort of thing has such a huge impact, and it must affect every department that has any link with children, and we are children and young people, so therefore it's not just about education, but this will also impact on their education, because they have to contribute towards school trips, so you can't deny a child for going on a trip if you haven't got the money. A lot of schools are charging for clubs and going on. They're going to school and they can't have the other things children are having. All that is their mental health, their emotional ability. I just think it's pervasive in every aspect of a family's life who is affected by this. Sorry, I'm talking too much.
So Chair, I agree with everything.
Yeah.
Can I just respond?
Yes,
I agree with everything you've said. That's absolutely fair. I already said I don't like universal credit, and I don't. And you absolutely, it's Chair's prerogative to set the agenda, and I'm only here as a one-off tonight. I was just making the observation that we've got, and absolutely it's not about education, it's about children and young people, as you say. I was just making the observation that we've got 55 schools, it's a £100 million budget, we've got 25,000 pupils here. It was just an observation. Your answer's perfectly fair. I mean, I agree with the first half of it more than the second, but your answer's perfectly fair. It is your prerogative, but I was just making that observation that I was looking tonight, I was preparing for the meeting, I was looking at previous agenda items and future agenda items, and I just thought there were very few on schools, and that's why I asked you the question, what were you hoping to achieve in having this, and you've given me your answer, so thank you.
And here's part of our work programme that we do. If
Thank you. Firstly, I know that I agree with what the Chair was saying, and I also know that a lot of work goes into balancing between schools and children's services when setting the work agenda. My point is a practical one. I think this report is very valuable in setting context for the board, for the panel, and it would be my hope especially, and I hope you would agree, that in future we would have further reports on the impact of universal credit on our families, on our children specifically, and this is a precursor to that.
Okay, so Natasha, you have you next.
Thank you very much for the report. I personally really am interested to see how Merton is dealing with the rollout of universal credit. Whether I like it or not, it still is going to impact the families of this borough, and I would very much like to see how we are handling that. So to that end, there's a couple of things that jumped out at me. This kind of, in 2.9, where you say that the pilot was extended without Merton knowing it was going to take in that many residents. Sorry, the extended to the SM4 postcode. You didn't realise that wasn't taken around, you didn't get any heads up. So were there any what was the impact on the families that happened to, and then how did we help them in that situation?
So absolutely, the initial pilot for families was for the Sutton Job Centre. They rolled it out gradually, but the Sutton Job Centre covers SM4 postcodes, and I don't think it was thought through. I don't think there was foresight in acknowledging that a lot of Merton residents live in the SM4 postcode. So nobody from the DWP, nobody from the Sutton Job Centre contacted me or anybody here to say that we would be part of the pilot by default because of the addresses in our borough. So, if I'm honest with you, first of all, we thought there was errors. People were we were getting notifications through about people claiming universal credit. So I obviously discussed this with the job centres. For Merton residents, so once we realised that what had happened, we then started to give advice to Merton residents. So we were still having Merton residents ringing and saying, I want to claim housing benefit from you. No, I'm really sorry, that's universal credit. No, I'd rather claim housing benefit. No, I'm sorry, it's not a choice. Yeah. Once you're in a postcode, then that's gone to universal credit, you have to claim universal credit. Early on, we saw instances where some Merton residents were waiting, I think I put in there 9 or 10 weeks for their first payment. And that first payment didn't include the first week, in many instances, their first week rent. So universal credit replaces a number of benefits, and one of them is housing benefit, which pays towards the housing costs. So once we understood where we were able to advise, we were able to get our welfare benefits team to give advice. We've got a local welfare support scheme which we give out as emergency payments, which replaced the crisis loan from several years ago from the DWP. So in short, we didn't have any heads up at all on it.
And also then you say that you are tasked by the DWP to have an assistance service, and you're getting money for that. Presumably you didn't get money for that first batch of assistance, and I wonder then, how do you resource that if more things come out of the woodwork? How do you resource that if you're not actually paying up front?
So we did get some money retrospectively. So we set up a scheme where, as I say, different areas of Merton and certainly the CAB would help Merton residents to access universal credit. So we had an arrangement with the libraries where they would help, where staff would help residents set up online accounts. So universal credit has to be claimed online. So they would do that. Different staff within the departments would help their clients access universal credit, and I'm sure that's the case in children's schools and families. I know it was in community and housing. The housing team would help people. We had budget and advice through the CAB. That's all been, so we've had funding up until now for that. That's been removed from us from April, whereas the government are going straight to the CAB to provide a lot of this advice for them. So they're sort of taking us out of the equation and they're going straight to the CAB. The CAB are getting funding direct to provide support.
Thank you, Agatha.
Thank you. Thanks for the report. Universal credit, I think, is a pain in the backside, to be honest. Residents are having a nightmare with it, actually. What bothers me is that, do residents, when they start applying for it, do they know that whatever they earn, no matter how much, if they get a little bit more than what they normally do, that they're going to be deducted from what they, because I've had a lot of issues with residents who've had money deducted when basically they're earning like 50p more, and what they get deducted is like £25 or something, and it's been sending people, I mean, it's upset somebody so much they stop actually applying for it. And now they're, sort of borrowing money left and right because they don't want to know.
So universal credit, the amount of universal credit that somebody receives changes, or can change every single month, dependent on their income. So if somebody's working, and you can receive universal credit if you're working, if your salary changes because maybe you've done a couple of hours overtime, or for whatever reason, your amount of universal credit will change. So that could impact on the amount of money that they get to help them live on and to pay their rent. There is a knock-on effect to the council as well. Probably a lot of people that get universal credit, we help them with their council tax. So we grant them council tax support. The council tax system, we bill everybody once a year, give you 10 or 12 instalments. Every time there's a change to somebody's universal credit, it will often change their council tax support because their income's changed by £1 or £10 or £5. So we end up rebilling our residents 5-6 times a year. Their instalments are always moving back. So there's sort of that problem as well. But yeah, you're right, the level of universal credit changes every month, or can change every month.
I had a resident billed from the council £6,000 for something, and they tried to get it sorted out and they couldn't get it sorted. So in the end they just got fed up, started paying slowly. They didn't want to know, but they're struggling.
Can I just say, I think sort of individual cases need to be taken up, perhaps through member inquiries.
Or I'm not taking it up, it's finished, I'm just letting them know.
I think
taking it
the thing to also highlight is that housing benefit that we administer still for pensioners and some residents technically is the same. If somebody's income changes, then they should tell us, and then that will affect either their housing benefit up or down. But realistically, if somebody's income changes by £5 a week or £5 a month, they're not going to tell us, and it wouldn't change. But for universal credit, it would.
Dennis.
Yes, thank you. My question was very similar to Agatha's, but it was more linked to housing benefit, the way that reacts if they earn more or whatever else. So it more or less the same question.
So housing benefit. So we administer that for the government. So we get whatever we pay out in housing benefit, pretty much we get back in grant from the government. But there is, if somebody's income goes up, then the amount of housing benefit they go down. I think the taper councillor, it's a little bit technical, is for every additional £1 of income they receive, they lose 65 pence in housing benefit.
Yeah.
I don't know what the tapers are for universal credit. Sorry, that's not for me. I know.
Has anybody else got any question? I'm very mindful of how late we're running. Could I apologise for having kept you waiting?
That's fine.
Thank you for bringing it. I mean, you're on the receiving end of a great deal of dissatisfaction and no fault of your own, just because it's good. But thank you very much, and I'm sure we'll be hearing from you in the near future. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
We can go on to agenda item 8 on page 73. Apologies and
well, I think so unfortunately, Carl Finkel, who's our head of synthesis, is unwell today, so isn't able to be here. So I think what I've said is, obviously she would have presented the paper and answered any technical questions you have. If you have questions, I can answer them, I will. And if it's something that needs more detail that she would have had the knowledge of, then we'll find that out and send you the answer.
I should have added Rachel Waddell's apologies. She couldn't make this evening. I apologise for not saying that earlier. Has anyone any questions? Helen.
So at 2.5, I wondered what plans were in place to develop the contributions of children and young people. That was one of the principles that needed to be worked on.
So I think there's sort of several things really. One is the poet questionnaire that you've got, the parent and carer copy you've got here. So the idea is that for all new education and care plans from now on, at the end of that process, both parent carers and children and young people will be sent a questionnaire about how they experience that process, and we and then they provide us with the responses to those questionnaires, and at the end of each year also do as a report that summarises the feedback they've got in total with sort of themes, and compares that with sort of national, because it's actually being trialled across a lot of local authorities nationally. So that's one of the ways that we will get feedback about how they feel about the end of the process. And we've also been working with our participation team and with our special schools and through the Senkos to think about how we ensure children and young people contribute more to those plans. So I think what happens particularly for our younger children is that they tend to, their contribution to their EHCP tends to be provided by their parents. So it's finding different ways of allowing them to contribute to that. One of the things that the EHCP hub, which I think we've spoken about before, which is it's going to be the electronic sort of online system, is that children and young people can make their own contribution to that, and that actually then is their contribution is made and can't be changed, if you like, amended by the parents. So that's another way that we're hoping it will make it easier for them to clearly get their voice as the process as they go through the process as well as at the end of the process.
Anyone else any questions? There's only one query I have, if I may. I understand the right of parental choice when the child has the EHCP, and then we are extending Perseid and Cricket Green to have children accommodated within the borough, but where parental choice is outside of the borough and perhaps in an independent placement, the difference in cost is quite extreme. So my concern would be, how do you balance giving parental choice, and especially if the child is young and depending on their need, how much their input is, and the financial situation, because you've got a fixed budget to deal with and you can't just give everyone their wishes. So if you could just say how you try to manage that.
Okay. The system is very much weighted to parental choice, so I think we probably would say that, and in lots of ways that's right. The system was about hearing parents and children's voices more. It probably feels a little bit at the moment as if it's skewed slightly the other way, in that tribunals and ombudsmen are tending to find on the side of parents. I think probably what we're doing from a practical point of view is we have looked at, for all those children who have been placed in an independent school, was that because we didn't have a place? Was it because we just didn't have enough places at our special schools? Was it because it was a particular need that we weren't meeting? Or was it because we feel we could have met the need in one of our schools, but there was something about the independent provision that provided something different? So I think we've looked at all of those things. We are always going to have some children who've got a very specific need, and we wouldn't have enough children with that type of need to provide that school ourselves. But one of the things we're doing around that is working with the 6 South West London boroughs. So we had a meeting today to be thinking, are there some of those where we could, between us, think about providing, we would have enough places we would need between us to commission something. We also have looked at things, for example, like one of the things we're doing around the expansion at Cricket Green is to say that one of the things they haven't done up until now is offer a GCSE programme. So one of the things that they will be offering as part of the expansion is that GCSE programme, so that will also make a difference. And also looking at the balance of sort of therapies and provision that our schools are offering, as opposed to what the independent schools are offering. So are we getting that balance right? I mean, one of the things that we are really clear about is actually quite a lot of the independent schools have very good marketing strategies. They actively go out and market their schools and get parents to come. So maybe we need to get better also at marketing how excellent our schools are, because our school, all of our special schools are good or outstanding. But actually one of the things we did find was that it was really clear that in terms of ASD and learning difficulties and SEMH, which is social emotional mental health needs, so that's more the need that we're picking up at Melrose. Those particularly primary school children, those were the gaps where actually we felt we didn't have enough provision in borough, so we were using external provision because we didn't have that. So we're working with Melbury College to look at developing some primary provision. I think that we're calling mini Melrose. So we're looking at that, and also some of the sort of more mental health provision that is at the moment provided at the Smart Centre, as well as looking at our ASD provisions, so the possibility of maybe thinking again about whether we would have a separate provision that was linked to Cricket Green, or a new ASD school, and also looking at our additional resource provision. So we are already looking to hopefully open from September some new additional resource provision for ASD on site Stamford School, which we're consulting about at the moment. So I think we're trying to do it in a mixture of ways. So it is about understanding that the parental choice is there, but actually the more we can flag up that actually what we've got would be the right choice, would be a good choice, as well as saying that some needs we will need to go to the independent sector.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Agatha.
Thank you, Madam Jane. I think it's fantastic what we're doing, and we should carry on doing and supporting all our children. But I would like to say that in all that we're doing, you've already said that we mustn't forget there will be certain children that we will not be able to fit in whatever not institute, whatever schools we've built, and we must consider them as well, because I know they're financially restrained and it's expensive, but we must always make sure that those children are catered for. And I know you will do that, but I just like to put that on record as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It needs to be the right provision for each individual child. That's what we're looking to do, where they can sort of meet their potential.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Cabinet member update. Caroline.
Thank you very much, Chair. I will start with provision of school places, but Jane has already talked about the SEN places that we have. So just to draw members' attention to the Harris Academy of Wimbledon, that the council has now handed over the land to the Education Skills Funding Agency, and we are on target for the school to open in September 2020. And want to also draw your attention to the fact that 1st of March will be offer day for secondary school. So applicants who made online applications will be able to access the result the evening of the 1st of March. But if it's paper application, then obviously you need to wait for the post. But in the report here, we talk about Rains Park being having offset inspection, and I just wanted to announce that the result was good, or is good, so that's fantastic. Also, I have a few good news stories. Joseph Hood and St. Mark's Primary School received letters from the Secretary of State to congratulate them for the pupil progress scores, which put them in the first 3% in the entire country. So that's absolutely good news. And I think earlier we were also talking about pupil premium, and I think St. Mark's Primary School is in that area where there's difficulty, and I think they're doing very well. The fact that they've been commended for their
We're not doing very well, we're doing
extremely well. To be placed in the top 3 in the entire country, that is absolutely extremely well. I agree with you. And the other good news story is that Rutledge and Records Lodge also received letters, this time from the Mayor of London. I think he has a Schools of Success group, and so they've been they receive a letter to congratulate them as well because of their strong outcomes, and so they have been put into that category of Schools of Success. So that's it, really. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Okay then, I've only got one update, but it is a good one. Hopefully you'll have all seen the news, but our Ofsted report that was alluded to at our last meeting has now been published, and has praised our MASH and the work that they do to protect our most vulnerable children. I've actually been given copies, thank you Sharon, for circulation, technically under the departmental update, but seeing as I'm mentioning it a bit early, if you would like to have a look, feel free. I'll just cover a couple of the highlights. So we've been praised for further enhancing our early help and support work, and our assessments of the needs of children have been described as exceptionally high quality. The inspectors note, and I think this is really very important, that children's views are clearly listened to and acted on, and I find that incredibly reassuring. They also mentioned that the MASH is well established and is effective multi-agency engagement. So I think we also have to thank our staff, but also our partners, both in schools, voluntary sectors, the police, the NHS, and of course our parents and carers as well. They note that we support our social workers and they are supervised effectively by experienced managers so that they progress work in a timely way, and at a time when social workers' capacity is something that is keenly scrutinised. I also think that is something to be commended. Now, we're not complacent, and I think that's also reflected in the report. We asked Ofsted to look at our planning, for example, proactively, and that is reflected. I do think that it's just a great testament to the hard work and dedication that was put in both by the frontline staff and everyone who supports them. On Friday I'm going to visit, I'm going to go for a walk around with Rachel, so I hope to be able to thank them in person. But I'm sure you will agree that they've put an awful lot of effort in. And at a time where the Ofsted inspection regime has changed, so it's a new challenge for them. But I am very proud of this report. So, thank you.
Thank you, and could you please pass on this committee's thanks? All of you, that includes Paul, Jim, and Kelly, where appropriate. And if you could ask Rachel to pass on too. Thank you. We could move on to item. Yeah. Sorry, do you want to ask? I beg your pardon. Yeah. I know. I'm just watching the clock. I apologise, Nigel, if you would like to ask a question.
Okay. Hello. A question about the school on High Park and the Living Church moving into Merton Hall in the south of them, which was highlighted in the budget savings report. There is a figure that this council will receive 5.1 million from the government. The question I would like to ask is, what are you doing use the 5.1 million for? Will you just spend it on?
I think that's because the new school will cost the local authority in a region of 8.7 million, and that is part of that. So there was a higher figure, so we used that income to reduce the total cost.
And would you consider spending on the children safety and the air quality, etc.?
Well, in terms of air quality, as you heard, the people from public health were presenting, air quality, poor air quality is all over in London. We are working with our public health team. We are working with Mayor of London team as well on public health, and we are going to do the very best we can do for our students, for not just for the students on the High Park, but once we do that work, whatever it is that we need to do, we'll be sure that people within that area will also benefit from a better air quality.
Okay, and another question. I know the building has started on High Park. therefore, Edinburgh Church has to move out, but Merton Hall isn't ready. Therefore, Edinburgh Church have been moved to Morden Chase School. The question I have is this council paying for Edinburgh Church to use the school? Meanwhile, Edinburgh has savings of over 139 million.
Well, I can't talk about Elim's savings. I don't know about their savings, but I can only talk about...
The question is this council paying for Elim to be at that school?
Well, we have to wait and see what happens, because right now we're hoping that Elim will move on time, and if they don't move on time, they will move to this new school. They will move to Wimbledon Chase.
Surely you must know, because the church is going to move there. It must be agreed already, and we would like to know how much are we paying for Edinburgh Church.
Nigel, can I just come in there? Could I ask if it could be found out? You're claiming Elim Church have got 139 million.
That is not relevant, really. It's
are
they being paid?
But your question is, but I think it does
council.
But is the council paying for them to have a site? And if their agreed site isn't ready, perhaps we could find that out. It's not known at this moment, but it can be looked at and an answer got back. Thank you, James.
Chair, thank you. Just because of the time, I would only ask for. I'm only seeking sort of general, quick answers. But the reports are fantastic from both of you. Really good progress and really good results, and so thank you for that. Can I just ask Caroline with schools? Again, a great report this evening. Are you happy? And I've asked you similar questions in previous years. Are you happy in your own mind? Do you know what is driving this success? Because as cabinet member, I think that's critical. And I appreciate time means that your answer might be very short, but I think that's critical that you as cabinet member know what's causing this success, and I'm hoping you'll say you do. And then, Kelly, my question for you was again really good report, absolutely fantastic, and not meaning to be critical, but just because it's the scrutiny panel, the areas for challenge. What are you saying to officers about that? Because it's an absolute given that this is a report that you're rightly proud of. There are 3 areas here for development, so I'm hoping as cabinet member you're saying to your team, well done, brilliant. Now, what are you going to do about these 3 areas? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have a fantastic school improvement team, and we have our assistant director here, who is for education, and we have Elizabeth Patrick, who is the manager for that area, and her team. They work very, very hard. I've visited many schools, and one of the first questions I ask is how supported they feel, and they've always really praised Merton and the support they get from Merton Council. I've just visited a new head teacher very recently as well, and she was very honest with me and said, I'm new, but so far I've got nothing to complain about. And so I think our school improvement team, they are very highly qualified people, and they do whatever they need to do to support our head teachers and the school to make sure that they achieve. And so I think that's the key to our success. Maybe Jane can add more, but I think that's the key to our success.
And sorry,
can I just add as well? I think we need to also thank our parents, because they need to support our young people, and young people try to study and sit down and listen, and I think they are making progress.
Chair, time's short, but I hope that's just one part of a much wider picture, that you as Cabinet Member, I was hoping you'd sort of say, well, these are the 5 or 6 reasons, but I appreciate time is short. Thank you, Chair.
Kelly, did you want to come up?
Yeah,
Very quickly.
So it's my first meeting with Rachel post publication of this report on Friday, so it is on our agenda for that meeting. They're very practical recommendations, so they're things like, in terms of planning, the planning we're talking about here is making sure that parents know what time they have to put their children to school, to bed in order to get them to school in the morning. So I think for me it's about making sure that we have a culture within the department that allows those workers to take the time to drill into those details, as well as making sure that we have the performance reviews to make sure that they do.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Good, thank you.
Thank you very much. And thank you to both of you for bringing some clearer news meeting. If we can move on to item agenda 10 on page 89. Sorry?
So we can't read.
No, that's next up. We're on the item before that.
Yeah, we can read everything on there. Yeah, we did 10. 11 is the next one. Jane, assuming we've all read it, which we have. Do you want to go straight in?
Yes.
Unless there's anything you specifically want to mention.
No, I don't think so.
Okay. Has anyone got any questions? James?
Thank you, Chair. Just a brief one, and if it's not appropriate to expand on it this evening, that's fine. But under special education provision, there's a reference halfway down to a secondary SEMH provision, medical provision being considered. And as I said, it's absolutely fine if you don't want to expand on that this evening, but I was just wondering what that was in mind. And just for members, Chair, who don't know, I'm Chair of Governors at Melbury College.
I think that's reflecting the fact that we know we've got more pull on what we call the bungalows, but the medical provision there, and it's looking at we've got enough capacity there. We probably need to increase the capacity there in terms of some of our young people who've got mental health needs and are accessing through, so they might either be who are unable to get into school, or we're doing that work on that. So it's reflecting the fact we're having that conversation with Melbourne College around that provision.
Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Or was there anything you wanted to say?
No, unless there are any questions.
So they look positive, the conversations you're having around that topic. With Melbury College.
Yes.
Right, thank you very much. And item 11, the bit you can't read, this is just going to give you out the enlarged. And Ellery, mention
So you've got your slightly more legible bits of papers. As one of the performance monitoring leads alongside Hayley, I'll introduce this, but we met with Sharon earlier this week, and Sharon may well be called upon to answer any detailed questions. But I think the report that you've read kind of outlines the key areas where there are some issues on performance data. In going through it, and I should firstly say well done on filling in all the blanks that we've been moaning about for a long time. They're all getting filled in now, including some additional categories that we've put in. So thank you very much to the team for their work on that. Going through it in more detail, we found a kind of couple of other things that we thought, like tiny little areas that are going to be picked up in the next one. And the ones that we were most worried about that are not kind of flagged up are towards the end, the kind of 36 and 37. And these are examples of categories where, because there isn't a target, there's not a target for how many troubled families should be involved and how many people should be reoffending, because there isn't a target, they don't have a green, red or amber, but the numbers are getting higher and kind of a bit more worrying. So the reoffending rate is much higher than the kind of London average, and as it should be. And our understanding is that's based on a small cohort, particularly kind of prolific offenders. there's just something to flag up. And on 37, the number of families engaged in Troubled Families programme, why that number going up is only a concern because the funding for that is going to come to an end next year, if I understand it. So these are families that are currently supporting who have lots of complicated problems, who there's a question mark about kind of what services we can deliver them after that.
Right, Sharon, sorry, is there anything you want to specifically draw attention to?
No, absolutely.
Doing things backwards.
Yeah, I think.
Sorry.
No, that's fine. No, absolutely no problem. So I think if Paul wants to add anything around the troubled families or the reoffending, then I think I'll pass over to Paul to answer that. But the other points I think I've laid out in that we need to focus on. I just want to say that the QA for the repeat CP registrations is underway, and we should be able to provide feedback on that in the next critical meeting.
I think the only thing to add on the reoffending cohort is that it's a numerator-denominator issue, because the number of young people going through the system is reducing. So we're ending up with a kind of smaller and smaller group of young people, and those young people are more complex and challenging, and therefore they're more likely to reoffend. Now, having said that, we're not complacent about it, and although the reoffending cohort looks at the moment high, we do have a kind of predictive tool that we're able to use, and we do expect the proportion to actually reduce. So hopefully, as time goes on, we should see a reduction in that, but it is a challenge. In relation to troubled families, we're currently in a position where because of the way the Troubled Families Programme operates, it's done on a kind of a return based upon the number of families that you're able to turn around, is the term that's used, that the challenge around the funding will kind of probably become a real issue towards in summer. So in terms of if it's a matter that this panel is interested in maintaining an eye on, then I would suggest that something would probably need to come back in spring, given some indication about how that programme will continue in the borough, and what our kind of planning beyond the existence of the Troubled Families Programme is. The second part of that is that we expect the spending review, which is due to take place in spring, will be given consideration to whether the Troubled Families Programme will continue to be funded by central government.
I don't know whether it's worth adding in terms of the numbers. It could be that they've changed because the way they're gathering the figures has changed around payment by results, but they've also expanded the criteria, so we're also pulling in more children who may have been worked with by other teams as well, but would have met the criteria in terms of that. So I think that might explain why it's increased, because it's been collected in a different way.
Just to say, the other reason why it's probably worthwhile bringing it back is because even with kind of full kind of identification of families, it's still likely that we will fall short of the target, and therefore there will be a shortfall in funding for next year, which is why it's important, I think, for you to have an early indication about how long we'll be able to maintain the programme in the borough.
It is on our work programme for the 13th of March, so because perhaps, and it's higher up the agenda, so we'll have a bit more time. Has anyone got any particular questions? Helen?
I just wanted to say, the school surplus places, are they within acceptable levels, higher than previously? The school surplus levels, reception and secondary?
So could they be brought to the March meeting? Is that all right, Helen?
Yeah, fine.
James?
Chair, thank you. Just a very quick observation, which I've made in the past, is obviously that I believe there are hundreds of these targets, aren't there? And inevitably, the meeting can only look at a very few. it doesn't matter which political party is in control of an authority, all authorities have issues, and that's the nature of them. And it was just the observation that, again, there are lots of Greens here, which is fantastic, but given this is a scrutiny panel, I'm just wondering whether the Greens should drop off once they are green and be replaced with more ambers, so that there are always relevant ones to be monitoring. But I just want to conclude with the point I made at the beginning. It doesn't matter which political party is in charge, it's not a political party point, it is just that out of hundreds, this panel can only look at a few, and surely it would be better for those to be amber ones, so that they can be discussed and debated, and as soon as they get green, they then drop off. Just an observation. Thank you, Chair.
My only worry is if green drops off, if then dips, we could still keep that on. But perhaps, I don't know if we need to look at more of these to come out. Did you want to come back?
Well, just that's an entirely fair point. The issue is until recently we haven't even had lots of the greens and ambers because there's been some missing data. So now I think we're getting a more accurate picture of exactly where it is. And like I say, Hayley and I take a role seriously of kind of we talk through the kind of red and ambers with Sharon kind of separately with the aim of them not having to spend a lot of time in this meeting. The less people have particular things to raise. But entirely fair point.
Sharon, did you want to add anything to that?
I know at the end of the day, we can adopt that approach. I think exception reporting is really important, so that we do bring to the fore where the key areas are. And I think if we do go down that line of changing what the indicator sets are, we then need to consider how often we report and so on. But that is something that I take advice from Eleanor and Hayley as well.
Thank you. Two questions for me. The young offenders, what are we trying to do to support them, to try and change? I know you say it's going to be a small cohort, but what are we trying to do? They've got all these sort of particularly difficult things to deal with, and so how are we going to help them to try and turn them around? It's very difficult, I know.
It's probably two things to say in relation to that. The first is that the council has an obligation to prevent young people becoming engaged in crime, and it also has an obligation to protect the community. So the Youth Crime Executive Board, which is a multi-agency group that Rachel chairs, is a board which holds that function, so preventing young people engaging in crime, protecting the community, and that board is one of the boards that will be subject to a youth offender inspection. So we'll be tested as a council about how are we keeping young people becoming engaged in crime. A lot of the activity across the council, from the work that takes place in schools, some of the work that takes place within health, the work around employment, all these things are intended to try and avoid children entering into criminal activity. Once children are convicted, we have a fairly comprehensive programme. I don't think we've had something here on the youth offending team come through for some time. It might be something that you might want to take a look at some point during the course of the year, particularly as it's likely to be subject to inspection. But we have a range of supports that we offer to young people, including therapeutic intervention. We've brought into place something which we know has been particularly effective elsewhere in the country around this particular challenging group of young people, which is trauma-oriented work. So all our practitioners have now been trained in something called AMBIT, which helps them in working with young people over time to address the traumas they've suffered as children, to have therapeutic interventions, work aimed to get them into schools, education and training, which is very successful, been a very successful part of the OTS work. We have mentoring, we have gangs workers, so the young people are on programmes, they're on orders, which mean they have to see their young workers regularly, often weekly, so very intensive work to try and address both their offending behaviour, but also to address their vulnerability, because as I say, a lot of these young people have come from families where they've been abused or neglected or suffered trauma. So a lot of work over a lot of time with some young people. We've had success, but with a large number of young people, as I say, we're down to a core of 10 to 15 young people who have been reoffending, and we are constantly looking at the thing called a reoffending toolkit, looking at what else we need to do to try and intervene to divert those young people away from it.
Working with their parents as well.
Work with parenting workers, and part of the ambit role, so part of the feedback we've had is that we need to, our youth offending workers also need to do more home visits and engage with families, and we've been tracking that through, we've had an audit programme to track that through, and we're seeing increasing engagement by youth offending workers with families as well as the young people.
Okay, the second thing is number 2 and 11, red. You know how I feel about red. So what are we going to do for that one? Maybe the assessment.
So the assessment target that we set ourselves for last year was 93%, and we're going to hit 86%. Part of what's driven our good performance in previous years, so we were up to 92% in 2016-17. We saw a drop last year, and we've not gone back up to the sort of high to the 90s. So in terms of trying to drive that performance, one of the things we've not had is the performance information that's helped us in previous years to drive the performance up. We do have that information now. We have regular management reports, so I would expect to see an increase in that. I think the thing to be kind of pleased about is that in spite of the fact that we've not had that information for well over a year, the performance has maintained itself at above the London average. So that just suggests that there's something in the culture which means that managers are paying attention to this. In terms of the impact of it on children, so are we seeing as a result of a declining performance, families waiting considerably long for their assessments? That's not what our data suggests. That's not happening. So we are going over, but it's by a few days in the vast majority of cases and instances. In relation to repeat child protection plans, I think I'd say this is a worry. But I'm fairly sure what the reasons are, because it's been the same reason in the previous periods when this has happened, when we've gone above London averages. And when we've undertaken audits of the cases involved, we've come up with the same information twice, and it's related to repeat victimisation with regards to domestic violence. And I'd be very, very surprised when we audit the cases this year, maybe we'll do a cohort analysis towards the end of the year, if that's not the same reason. So there is something about the way in which the council looks at domestic violence and how we work together as a council, because this isn't something that Children's Services can resolve on its own, and there are particular challenges for colleagues in the police about the way in which we manage this, and for the Marek. So for those young people, we're not seeing a kind of concomitant rise in care proceedings. So it's not as if the numbers of children becoming subject to child protection plans is leading to an increase in care proceedings. So what this suggests is that we're responding to specific incidents which have resulted in children going back onto child protection plans. But I think you're right to raise it as a matter of concern. It's something that certainly we're concerned
about. You know how I feel, it always takes one little incident that we've tried to you know, keep going on about the red ones, I will stop.
Could I just say it is good that you are closely monitoring that, and if it does take us to the red, it is better you do that than sweep it under the carpet, because those children are the priority, and if they need it a second time, they do. So I think that's what you have to do in your corporate parenting act. Thank you very much. Can we say the work programme is noted, but for the one for the 13th of March, but the last item on that is setting the work programme, so if you can come with your ideas that you might like added in, that would be appreciated. Thank you very much for coming. I'm sure it's been a long meeting, but been very interesting. Thank you for your contribution. And Sharon, Paul and Jane, thank you very much.
Very impressive. No, it wasn't. Mm.